Welcome to our first session today and of this conference. Informed and engaged citizens, personalized medicine for the individual and society. Citizens and patients are indeed in the very center of personalized medicine. But how and when to include both in the process? Please find in the interactivity section on your right, again, on the blue button, two questions that we are asking you as audience for this topic. Is your organization actively involving patients and citizens in your activities? And what are the most important aspects where patients need to be engaged? Please, you have 20 minutes to answer the question. Take your time. And we will have a look on your feedback later. I would like to present the two moderators of this session. Professor Mette Hartlev, Professor of Health Law at the Faculty of Law at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. Welcome, Mette. And David Harry, who has, I think, many different hats as patient advocate. So I might mention his participation in the European Patient Academy on Therapeutic Innovation, EUPATI, and through this in IMI. So thanks both, Mette and David, for your participation in the scientific committee, and thanks a lot for moderating the session. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. In this session, we will discuss how and when to include the patient perspective in the development life cycle of personalized medicine prevention, products and interventions. We will show the opportunities, benefits and barriers of patient empowerment in healthcare, research activities or policy development. We will show the experience of the patient's role to provide an overarching perspective and first-hand experience on what it is like to live with a disease, and by doing that, ensuring that interventions truly respond to patient needs and priorities. What is a little bit striking also to me as a patient representative and activist, personalized medicine has never been on our horizon. You will find very few patients who know what personalized medicine is about, and you will find almost no researcher who is working with a patient group on that topic, and you will surely find hardly a patient organization engaged in this field. And this is why this session is so precious. A focus will also be made on data integration and management, as well as on education and training that will be required to allow patients and patient organization to contribute to this field. And it is now my very great pleasure to introduce a speaker from the patient side who knows what we are talking about. Bettina Ryll, resident in Sweden. She has a medical degree from the Free University in Berlin, Germany, and a PhD in Biomedical Sciences. After losing her husband to melanoma, she founded the Melanoma Patient Network Europe and developed a special interest in patient-centric clinical research, innovative trial designs, and novel drug development concepts. She has been a pioneer in many areas. She has been running the patient advocacy working group at ESMO, being the first non-oncologists doing that. And she is currently sitting on the Horizon Europe Mission Board for Cancer since 2019. She is still extremely active with her Melanoma Patients Network, and she will reflect on the concept of personalized medicine from her perspective as patient representative and what it means on how we conduct research, implement research findings, and incentivize innovation overall. Please, Bettina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and it's a great honor to be here with you today and to share with you my perspective and my experience with in the area of personalized medicine. Now, often we have talked about the importance of patients, so I thought it was only appropriate to comment that I am not a patient. As David already just said, I lost my husband to cancer in 2012, nearly 10 years ago now. And this is what got me into advocacy. And often when we look at the discussion, the term patient is used somewhat loosely and leads to an incredible amount of confusion. So I would like to start with a definition, and this is something that I have developed for my own work for the Melanoma Patient Network Europe, but it has been proven useful also for others. So we consider a patient someone who's concerned with their own situation, and a carer would then be someone who's concerned with that very specific person. But the interest is just very self-centered in a way. A patient advocate is someone who has widened their interest to the group of people with the same condition and is already considering the group and not just their own personal situation. On top of that, you have expertise, as David already said. So I have a medical degree. I have worked in Germany and in France, and I have a PhD in the University College London. I actually have studied branchial-arch patterning, and I have worked a couple of years in evolutionary biology. So I spent a couple of years of my professional lives wondering about heterogeneity, more in the sense of how do we create it, both in development as well as in evolution. And that obviously has direct implications on how I look at personalized medicine and, for example, how we deal with heterogeneity in tumors. So that would be a technical level. At the same time, if, for example, you wanted to discuss a legal issue, I would probably be the worst possible advocate you could pick on that topic, because I would be a total lay advocate in this area. So we look at patients or our community along three different axes, both the personal relationship to the condition in question, the ability to present a group perspective, and then the relevant technical expertise in the area. So I'm standing here today as someone who has lost someone close to cancer, someone who is active as patient advocate at mainly the European level, and as someone who is deeply involved in the topic because, as David already mentioned, I am a member of the Horizon Europe Cancer Mission Board, and I have been the person working on the personalized medicine recommendation. So I actually have spent most of my last year wondering and thinking about that topic. However, for me, the entry point into personalized medicine is strictly personal. And that's why I show you a personal picture. This is my husband in a rowing boat. I live in Sweden, an hour north of Stockholm, and there's a lot of water, and there's also a lake quite close to where we live. This is a dreadful old rowing boat, but it was one that was my husband's idea of a perfect weekend. Taking this old rowing boat with these terrible wooden oars that give you splinters and a terrible muscle ache in your shoulders, and the kids out onto the lake. Why this is so personal for me and is so precious is that this is actually a dated photo, because of course we're digital today. And it is taken a month of him being on a clinical trial for targeted therapy. And while I'm not going to go into that trial design, because that was my motivation to go into advocacy in the first place, it is actually the fact that he is able to row this boat. Because when he was starting on that trial, he had lost the use of his right arm because of the tumor that had been growing in front of his arm and down his arm, and it encased his elbow joint. He was no longer able to dress himself. I had to cut his food, and he had started to have problems working because he was working in IT, so he needed to use both his hands for typing. So that kind of difference that we saw in that drug was extremely relevant to him as a person, to us as a family, and he kept the use of his arm to the end of his life. Actually, some of his colleagues couldn't believe he was dead because he had answered their questions 8 days before his death. And the odd thing, what struck me at that point, was that none of that was ever captured anywhere. It was on a trial. His response by measurable lesions wasn't that great. It was just kind of average. The quality of life questionnaires that were asked didn't capture what was relevant to us. So that kind of, I actually went to the company afterwards and I thought you were about selling drugs. This has been such a different to us. And that is for me the personal aspects of medicine that has to be integrated in personalized medicine. And I think that where we're missing a big, big deal. Now, this is something to keep in mind when I talk about personalized medicine. I also integrate that personal concept, and I want a concept that is broader than the current narrative we have about positive biomarker usually leading to the use of treatment, mostly an expensive drug. I believe that the space is much broader. We also have to include, for example, negative biomarkers, which are still quite common, but from a patient perspective, what would make a true difference for people would be to identify those patients who will actually be fine without having to take any treatment to reduce side effects. Of course, long-term toxicity, short-term toxicity, but also the burden of care. And I believe that that's a part of personalized medicine that we are currently not really tapping into and not considering enough. Now, one of the issues, and we have already heard there will be sessions on data coming later today, is that we often talk as if the real world was the problem. As a patient, that's not the case. It is not that the real world is having the problem. It's our methodology that is not capturing what matters to us. And what really truly matters, and that's something that is actually, I'm still surprised that I'd never noted that before it struck us personally, is that as medics, we are trained to think in groups, in populations. But when you're personally affected, that is just simply not good enough, because if you just have data for a group, you do not know where you fall in a group. And a colleague of ours, whom we unfortunately lost last summer, was an engineer, and he kept saying that if I, as an engineer, built tunnels and started drilling into a mountain from both sides, and in 8 out of 9 cases, the two ends would not meet, no one would hire me. And I actually just Googled, problems with tunnels, and you find it in the newspaper. This is an example of Seattle, where a tunnel drill went horribly wrong. But he said in medicine, we find it acceptable that we just are so imprecise and that we cannot say who will live and who will die. If you think about it, even the highest accuracy, if you have a 60% over survival, you can have the most beautiful p-value in this world. As a patient, it still leaves you with a situation very close to the flip of a coin, whether you're going to live or die. And that is obviously for yourself, for your family, it makes a considerable difference. But our community talks about it as if this was solid information. So we are accepting currently a degree of imprecision in medicine that we would not be accepting in any other field. And that's obviously something that I believe has to change. So, as I already alluded to, I have spent some years of my professional life wondering about heterogeneity. And this is something, these are some not random, but screenshots I took during the last year when preparing and talking to any possible stakeholder I could find in the personalized medicine environment. And at this point, I really want to mention that it is a quite diverse stakeholder community who are all affected of this personalized medicine concept and the setting, and who have to contribute. People come from very different backgrounds and cultures, and I must say that I was quite humbled by the willingness of people just to talk to me and invest time and information to teach me, to share their insights and their knowledge. And this is something that I picked up along the way. Phenotypic heterogeneity is a starting point, not a finding. And a lot of what we're doing in personalized medicine, I think, is at the moment trying to generalize and then try to force adapt it to reality. Well, in reality, what we should be doing is we should start with the complexity and build our models on top of that. So from a scientific perspective, I find our current approach to medicine highly unsatisfactory, because when I was looking for options for my husband when he was progressing on that therapy that had allowed him to regain the use of his arm, a lot of the published, even in high impact journals, publications missed that critical last step to validate it for the clinical setting. And I believe from a patient perspective, this is an issue we have to urgently fix in order to use that knowledge that we already have to the benefit of patients. So this is a little bit a summary kind of, or like what I've said. As I said, last year I talked to as many stakeholders as I could get my hands on, or well, whom I could convince to on a Zoom call rather, was more like trying to understand what the current challenges in the personalized medicine arena are. So one of them is that if you look who's all involved, and if you really want to think about a research setting up to something ending in a patient and producing positive outcomes, because that is obviously the purpose of the entire exercise, you need a huge number of stakeholders. You need researchers. You need people who can turn these research findings into something that is applicable to a clinical setting. You need, of course, medical professionals. You need the technology surrounding all of that. And personalized medicine, of course, is not just drugs, but it would also be applicable to radiotherapy, to radiography, so to anything in that setting. I'm still very much looking forward to catch up with someone who is working on personalized care concepts. So there is quite a variety already just in that medical setting. Just having a diagnosis or having an analysis of a tumor, we know very well that just only gives options for a small part of patients. So we'll have to be able to integrate our research findings better into the clinical setting. Then just having an option, if you cannot get your hands on the appropriate treatment, is still no use for a patient. So how do we make that happen? How do we make new treatments accessible? How do we learn whether they work? Because otherwise our healthcare systems will not reimburse them. So there's a long chain of issues that we have to solve. Data comes into play in that setting. With that comes incentives. So I believe what is there, either the issue and there is the sheer diversity. They also governed at different levels. As I said, in order to produce positive outcomes, we need a treatment or a decision to reach a patient. That is a decision that is taken at local level. Healthcare, however, is not just governed by the local level. We usually have regional organization in our countries. We definitely have a national organization. Some of our processes, like, for example, our regulatory authorities, operate at a European level. And some of it is globally, because, for example, drug development is decided at global level. So we need an integration of these multiple levels of governance if we really want to be successful to get that treatment to the patient in the very, very last step. Because it is so complex, I think at the moment, the opacity in this entire system, because I freely admit, I have been looking for that person who could give me this perfect overview and could explain why we are not there where we should be. I must admit, I'm still looking. I haven't found that person. I have, however, found lots of people who have a very good in-depth understanding of their local area. They also all have their favorite enemies and the favorite person who's at fault that nothing is working. The odd thing is everyone is pointing fingers. The culprit is always someone else, and it's always someone removed from their own setting. So people know their own area. They see a very limited range. They optimize in that setting, and the problems are somewhere else. And of course, if everyone does that, we shouldn't be surprised that the entire setup is not working ideally. It also invites misalignment of incentives, because of course, if you don't understand or you can't even see the full spectrum, even if you wanted and had the best intentions, how would you even be able to identify what a good incentive looks like? So the big picture, or the lack of the big picture in there, I think is a real challenge for all of us. And we have to think about mechanisms of effective oversights, and not just oversight, but also implementation. Because if we're serious about the concept and what we wanted to deliver for the good of our societies, and because it does not only include treatment, personalization also covers prevention, early detection. So the potential benefit is way larger than a single cancer patient. I believe we really have to rethink how we organize it, how we think about it, and how we then implement it. And with that, I would like to share with you a recent example, because once I ended up with this connectivity that we have to tackle, I started looking for models what an appropriate model could look like. And I was very lucky to fall over the Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. That was linked to our mission work as well, because as you know, the cancer mission is one of 5 missions of the European Union. This mission concept is something novel. We have never tried this at that level. It is based on a recommendation by Mariana Mazzucato to how to tackle vexing challenges for our societies. So I was kind of exposed to the concept, and it was only then that I actually learned that my own network, my own patient network, operated according to a similar level. That had been organically grown. But these people have put a lot of thought and structure into how do we make a mission work. Everyone talks about getting a man on the moon, but if we look into healthcare, it's not one man on one moon. We have lots of moons and we have lots of people we have to get somewhere. So I was honored that they invited me to present my headache, if you want, as a study case to a workshop they were running last week, where there was a diverse stakeholder group from across the world interested in the topic, and started to look into principles and methods. And I've just taken a screenshot, so this is an intermediate part of the work, but it kind of gives already a flavor of how complex and how much detail one has to put into this system. But I must say that I'm personally, I was kind of relieved that people have been thinking about the methodology. So right now, where I see the challenge and the potential at the same time is that we have lots of the pieces that we need. What we now need is to join them up and make sure we don't impede each other and find ways to realign incentives that have gone missing in the pot. Of course, there are some tricky issues on top. I think data would be one of them. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit in the summary right now, what I think should be happening in the next few steps. The current way of how we think about medicine, I call it groupthink because it annoys everyone, and it's exactly what it is. Thinking of people in groups, of conditions in groups, is insufficient from a patient perspective. We as individuals are not just unique by design. We also need, I think, as the next level of medicine, our aspiration should be to treat people at that level. The concept is broader than just positive biomarker expensive drug. So if we want to leverage the potential of the personalized medicine space, our concept has to broaden. It represents a fundamental paradigm shift in how we think about medicine. And that has wide implication or far-reaching implications because it affects the way how we conduct research, so clinical trials, how we approve drugs, how we look at the cost effectiveness of therapies, and how we administer them. So we have to start thinking about algorithms, how we proceed or think about a disease setting instead of having a one match, like one histology and then a drug in there and then just hope for the best. The implementation, I've been elaborating on that, will require effective bridging between quite diverse areas, and it needs a cross-sectorial governance, which has to stitch together local to the global level and back. Data will play a critical role in there, and two aspects in there, because I'm sure there will be sessions going to that in depth. Standards, because if we cannot agree on standards, that will make sharing of data absolutely impossible. And privacy. I think, in my opinion, that is probably the most critical point in there. That's something I didn't pay enough attention to at the beginning. From a patient perspective, privacy by design is what we should start with. Explore mechanisms like differential privacy, just asking patients to share their data for the greater good of whatever, while risking themselves or their own children, I don't think is a wise step. I believe that the persons who managed to deal with this privacy issue, combining privacy with the ability to interrogate large data sets, that will be where the magic will happen. And for those of you, because I believe that this audience will be largely European, I believe that right now Europe is at a unique point in time where we are able to shape our environment in a way that will allow us to push personalized medicine for the future of our citizens. Right now, we have the Beating Cancer Plan, we have the Cancer Mission, we have the EU for Health, we have the EU Health Data Space, we have the pharma legislation, and we are rethinking the GDPR. This is a moment where we have to decide where we see our future. At the moment, if we look at personalized medicine, we have a commercial version of it. If you think about Genentech's Foundation One and their integration with the e-health records, that is a commercially driven interest in personalized medicine where the data is held by a commercial entity. Another alternative might be what is happening in China, where the Chinese state deliberately sets in personalized medicine to explore the entire range of it, but probably with implications for privacy and freedom that would not be acceptable to a European audience. So I believe that right now is the point to develop a viable attractive alternative that combines privacy, protection of the individual, while allowing learning and progress to, in the end up where we should always, I think, where all our hopes would be. We all hope that the day we get sick, there will be options for us, and that these options will be tailored for our needs, but also according to our wishes. It might not be your dream to go rowing a boat on a lake. It definitely is not mine, but preferences are as individual as people are. And I think our aspiration should be to do right by the single person, both by their genetics, their genomics, but also by their preferences. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Now the bell is ringing. I would like to thank you so much, Bettina, for this very stimulating and interesting presentation, which gave a lot of food for thought, I think, not only for our session and the panel discussion afterwards, but also for a number of the other sessions at this conference.